Welcome to Automation's official design competition. In this video, you are joining us for the roundtable discussion of the finalist designs in category G, the history of the pickup truck. Your hosts Chris and Rob are joined by today's special guest and judge, ConeDodger240. He's a long-time Automation and BeamNG streamer and has been a friend of Automation, its community, and the devs for many years. Also, he's the editor of these videos. We'll start by asking our guest judge a few questions first, and then we'll dive into a more in-depth analysis of each finalist in an open roundtable format.
Tell us about yourself, ConeDodger.
I am ConeDodger240. Got the name because of dodging cones or autocrossing a 240SX, and through that I started showing more interest in doing automotive kind of content and stuff. And about 10 years ago now, I've started posting videos on YouTube and then onto Twitch. From there, I started doing automation streams back in the day. It's been at least 8 years or so now, and build-offs with automation cars all the way up till today. And that has become what I do with my life, is broadcasting my bad opinions about cars and motorsports and everything with wheels to the world.
So what you got started in automation? What got you interested in that initially? And how did you find out about it?
Automation, I do believe, came to me from I cannot remember, it might have been Autoblog. It was one of those older, automotive blogging sites before the days of your Reddit, your Discord, or anything like that. It was just a post about these silly Australians building engines in their video game engine. And I remember watching live streams on livestream.com of one Daffy, just doing 3D models of engines. And from that point on, we kind of formed a little bit of a friendship and have been doing stuff in automation ever since.
So you've been involved with automation pretty much since the beginning.
Yeah, pretty much since the point at which automation was anything, because from what I understand, it was an idea long before even that point. But it's incredible what has come out of what was a simple, four-cylinder creator, basically. What size displacement four-cylinder would you like to create today to what we're about to see today?
Yeah, it's been a dramatic evolution over the last 11 years now, actually, hasn't it been?
And it's been fun kind of shaping the kind of content I do around that. Like in the early days, it was just, just kind of recreating engines, seeing how close we could get to today, holding competitions like this, or just doing elaborate designs automation, even doing campaign playthroughs. It's incredible how much range there has been in that span of time with automation.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed myself over the years, just the range of competitions that have been held, and it's a real testament to the creativity of our community, just what has been done with the game so far, and what a lot of people still have planned to do with it. It's really quite interesting to see all this emergent gameplay coming out of automation.
And it's just changing all the time, too.
So I guess the next question is, how did you get interested in cars in the first place?
Well, this is pretty relevant to what we're going to be looking at today. My father is basically the main reason I got into cars at all. And growing up, he had a last generation Chevrolet El Camino, or as we know it, the mullet of cars. I grew up in those. I literally grew up sitting in the quote unquote backseat of an El Camino going to school. Don't tell your, local child protection services that, but it's, that was kind of just how I got started, him tinkering on cars. He was always working on them. And I basically got my introduction to trucks with something that some people don't even consider a truck.
Well, that's pretty fascinating, actually. And yes, we won't definitely tell Child Protective Services about that, because there is technically no backseat in an El Camino, as far as I can remember.
There's a great cubby spot, though, like under the bed, but ahead of the floorboard. Wonderful for your... No, don't put your 5-year-old back there. I didn't say those words.
So I guess that kind of leads into our next question, is to ask about your car history, both sort of the highlights and the lowlights of that.
They've all been highlights, besides one. I started with cars personally right in high school. Got my first 240SX. I won't bury you in the details of all 8 of those that I've owned from then to now, but that became the car for me. You know, it became the car I love to build, I love to drive them, and eventually started to love to race them as well. A lot of things in between there, some MR2s and some more modern cars. I tried to love a Pontiac Solstice and failed. I would say that's the only car I've ever owned that I just did not like, and currently drive the last Audi TT manual that was ever made in '08.
So 240 seemed to be your big specialty. What drew you into them particularly?
Interestingly, it was more of a, how would you word it? It was a backup option. What I really loved was the old Datsun cars. I loved the Z cars or even 510s and things like that. But at the age that I was, 17, 18, even at that point, before things went crazy, I did not have the money to be driving something like a 240 or 280Z. But 240SXs, interestingly, were very not loved at the time, and they were pretty affordable. And just through chance, getting those, and although it did take a while to find one, just being the first car that I ever really sunk a lot of time into, it just became one with me. And the two of us are married together forever. Don't tell my wife.
Well, I promise I won't say. That's interesting though, because I too probably around your age, and I also remember that 240SXs were very popular among sort of the high school crowd in my time, because they were cheap and affordable speed. I mean, it's definitely not that now. I mean, they're quite expensive cars now, but back in the day, they were the option if you wanted a two-seater. They're 2+2, correct?
It's 2+2, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's funny saying it like cheap speed, because it's neither now. They're both expensive and they're slow. My wife has a Kia Soul that I guarantee you is faster than a factory 240SX.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible how times have changed with cars. Just how that even the most pedestrian cars are just outrageously fast compared to those that we were just totally lusting after when we were growing up. So I guess that kind of leads into the next question, which is, what kind of cars and eras of cars are you most interested in? And I would posit a guess that it's primarily 1990s sort of sports cars and sports hatchbacks for you, correct?
That's kind of where most of it has settled in. But I love all the different eras of automotive design. Like I said, my dad has grown up, your classic American Chevy guy. So I grew up also going to Chevy shows and, the classics. And as a kid, I feel like most people go through this phase where it's like, well, I don't want to just do what my parents did. I want my own thing. And that's kind of how I got into more of the 80s and 90s Japanese cars. But as time has gone on, now I personally own a 67 F-250 ramp truck. So I've absolutely grown very passionate about that. I love the older British cars. I love the modern Japanese stuff. There's very few genres of cars that I can't find something to like about.
Fantastic. So you're a man of many tastes.
Many bad tastes, yes.
But we touched a little bit on automotive design there. When you look at a car, what are sort of the features that draw you in that make you think, oh wow, that's a really good design?
I guess it's interesting for me because the automotive design isn't necessarily something that's very flashy to me. I feel like there's certainly wild array of tastes out there, but I've always looked for things that just look like they thought the design out all the way. Like it all flows together, it all makes sense together. And that's something that's always really been important to me. How in the world I ended up with that Pontiac Solstice, I don't know. I must have had a very bad head injury at the time. But every other thing I've owned, yeah, I love that real sense of this was designed for purpose. Somebody designed this and they really crafted it. And that's probably the most important part of automotive design to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly very important to have everything flow together like that. It's a recurring theme talking with not just our community and what they say about the designs that they create, but also looking at what a lot of real-world automotive designers are saying too, is that it all has to work together from front to back. You can't just have part of the car look good and part of it be sort of an afterthought, or seemingly like an afterthought.
And in this modern world of parts bin cars, that's increasingly hard to do. You have to make parts that share dozens of vehicles work together on completely different designs.
And not only that, but there's also the challenges of meeting regulatory requirements too.
Oh, those pesky regulators.
You mean the regulation that 5-year-olds should sit in the back of a certain car, yes?
Yeah, that regulation was very important in the early 80s. And
Exactly. One more question for you is, and I can probably already figure the answer to this, is if you could work for any car company as a designer, which one do you think you'd be most interested in?
that is an interesting question. I don't know that I ever really posed too much thought into that. It's so difficult ever imagining that you could change the world of any of these manufacturers because they seem so kind of steadfast these days. I think starting your own is more interesting to me, which if only there was a game you could do that in. I guess I would have to go to Nissan and just try to knock a little sense into them because their designs seem pretty stale these days.
Okay, well that's a very interesting answer, and I guess now we should dive into our roundtable discussion of the designs that we had submitted into Category G, the history of the pickup truck. A pretty wild build, actually. It's a sort of a Japanese style from the 1960s and 70s, three-wheeler flatbed truck.
With lots of detail thrown into it. And it has an instant appeal, I think. It's just so archetypal that just... and very long, as you can see.
I was going to say instantly, this is your obvious, very busy town delivery vehicle. I do question how they're going to navigate those tight streets with quite an impressive bed.
Yeah, that long overhang would be quite difficult to navigate around small streets. But, I mean, this would basically be, for a rapidly industrializing country in the 60s and 70s, this would basically be the biggest vehicle you'd see on the streets.
Absolutely. But very utilitarianly built. I love the way that it merges straight from what is obviously a cab that is designed for anything, and then a utility bed that looks spot on as far as the aftermarket kind of scene where you would just put this bed on any frame that you had available to you.
Also, I would like to point out that you can really see the purpose of the vehicle from its core design, which is the three-wheeler, of course. So, front wheel is deemed to have basically no weight on it, even though there is the cabin and the motor on it. And then the rear axle is pretty much centered under the bed. I think that really delivers on this promise of this is a proper utility vehicle, and we don't really care about the rest, but on the contrary, the rest is actually quite nicely designed. Just bring your attention to the bug eye blinkers. I thought those were such a nice touch on this one.
And it's such a perfect example of the utility kind of build, where you would imagine this was a fixture that was meant for some other vehicle that very elegantly fit into, a front grille. And here they are on top of the fenders, just serving their purpose. They are there as indicators, and they actually work really well up there.
And that's kind of the cool thing about utility vehicles like this, not just in automation and how people design them, but also in real life, is that you see a lot of the designers recycling a lot of components from other vehicles. A prime example of that is like Chevy pickup trucks. Like their full-size commercial trucks use the same cabin construction as the smaller mainstream pickup trucks. So it's not just an exercise in recycling, but it's also an exercise in maintaining branding so that you have kind of an instant presence. It's like, oh, you can just look at a big truck and say, oh, that's a Chevy truck, or oh, that's or whatever. So it's very nice to see that this person has definitely put some thought into that and how these vehicles would have been designed back in the day.
Absolutely. Straight down to the little ankle vents there just to give you some reprieve from the heat.
Mm-hmm.
And the battery, just this little extra detail. But while we are going to the back here, my main point of contention in terms of love of details, like how the hell can you mix 3 different fonts in such an awkward way? No, 4 different fonts. Sorry, 4.
Yeah, that is a little bit of a...
It's the utility world. We grabbed whichever stickers we could find out of the bin.
Oh yes, but also I don't know if you agree, but the text on the top right of the rear, that looks way more modern than this vehicle is from the time period. So it's completely, at least to me, it seems completely off, Back to the Future or something.
I would agree.
Yeah, something like that. I think the text would actually would have been stamped into the metal and probably not even painted. It would just been like certainly what you'd see in a lot of older pickup trucks, where it's just a stamped name in the metal, and that's it.
A smaller version of the front logo would also have worked, just the Kinden kind of text, the branding on this, kind of centered, or even off to the side, but same chrome letters, that would have kept the era much more correct. Because on all the other aspects of the rear, they are spot on there. You have the consistency with the round tail lights, and I don't see a reverse light here, do you? Am I blind? No, I don't think
see
so.
one, but this could also be an era before the era
Yes.
of reverse lights.
So again, a point of error correctness in that
Right.
sense. So it's all good. What I would like to point out though is the rather shoddy looking front in terms of how those plates have been welded together. I think that is a little bit of a lost opportunity to make a vehicle that is just perfect apart from font choice. And it seems a little banged up at the front sides.
Certainly in the joint between the front fender and the front metal, but also the wheel cover as well in the front. There's a little bit of funniness going on with the fixtures there.
Certainly an ambitious use of fixtures. I can understand and relate to the challenges of trying to sculpt an entire front end like this, but it does feel a little bit more kit car than production car in that way.
We have here the quintessential late 1980s, early 1990s American pickup truck.
And oh boy, does it work for me. This is, like I stated in the judging video, this is not pretty from any angle, but man, is it well made.
That pretty much sums up American pickup truck design for a good 40 or 50 years there, where utility and bruteness were everything, and this is definitely showing that.
Yeah, this is definitely form over function over form for sure.
Oh, just a color appreciation time here, please. Oh, this is for choosing ugly colors. This is just the perfect combination of ugly colors that makes it just so juicy. It's so good. It just fits.
And it's very in theme with especially late 80s and early 90s trucks, where it seemed like there was some intention to style them up. So they would very frequently do like a flashy color or like a two-tone paint job and some striping to distract you from the absolute, block of cheese of the rest of the vehicle.
And you'll actually see in this one, it's actually a sneaky three-tone paint job, which is actually very ambitious on part of the builder to do that. Very well done to that.
Also, the hint or the red highlighting in there of the side also really well does its job at connecting front to back. It is helping enormously from any side front view to the side rear view, and just connects front and back. Not that it even needed that necessarily, because it's so consistent in its design, but that just puts the cherry on top, and it's also cherry red, so that does it.
I will say from this perspective, the scaling of the truck might be a little bit more of your late 90s to 2000s, where they were introducing a extra row of seats into trucks. In the early era of these trucks, this is perfect because it does not have doors in the back. You were to access those from the front door. But the whole proportions of the truck in this case seems like the bed is a little bit squashed, as if it was a 5 or maybe 6 foot bed. Whereas I feel like that design really comes in later in American truck design.
Yeah, in that era of trucks, a lot of times if you had the really short bed, they'd actually be like the flare side instead of the full fleet side bed.
It was essentially an open trunk, not a bed.
Exactly. The one thing I will point out is I'm not 100% convinced on some of the detailed choices on this, specifically the wheels. I don't think you'd see beadlock wheels in a truck of this era, and probably not even on a factory truck at all in just about any era.
Only
The
in
other,
modern design, you'll start to see this like a faux beadlock on like an extreme version of a truck, or something that's marketed as an off-road truck. This, though, I agree, it feels like a set of aftermarket wheels and tires. Those tires seem just a bit too large for a factory option.
Those would cost half a fortune.
the other thing I'm not 100% sure on is the choice of mirrors, because these don't really look like the sort of the aftermarket towing mirrors that you'd see of the era, but they're not really. This is kind of the era when they were actually starting to put some thought into the aerodynamics of the mirrors in pickup trucks and these don't really look like they fit very well in that regard.
If those mirrors were on a 60s to 70s truck, perfect. But I agree, on this truck, they look dated. They don't look correct.
I like the addition of the bed rails and the box and the bed too. I mean, that's just perfect for what you'd see for a truck like this.
Absolutely, and it does kind of still tie into that almost aftermarket or maybe dealer optioned up truck, where they were making an attempt to fancy them up to make them look not just like a utility vehicle, which is an important part of truck design throughout history as well, because there was a major shift of utility into people mover for trucks.
And then, of course, the addition of the little window for the emergency cases of having eaten too many beans. And that gets out there really nicely. It's such a nice little touch. I didn't notice at first, but overall, even though the sides are kept simple and the overall design is done in a way that feels well crafted but not over the top. It's not trying to show off anything. Well, apart from maybe the wheels. There's just so much to discover in this that makes me like it more and more the longer I stare at it.
Yeah, this is full of just fantastic little touches here and there. It's definitely done by somebody who knows what certainly a North American pickup truck would look like in this era.
Absolutely. I will say the rear is maybe a little bit more modern than the front. In this era, I would expect the back to be just about as simple as you could get. Still with a basic taillight and then the license plate just kind of tacked on there. So maybe styled up a little.
I think it might be the curves to the main shape of around the number plate that is slightly off era in comparison to the front, where
Right.
you don't have those nice curved shapes. But overall, I think due to the colors and the consistency of keeping the stripe that goes around on the top there, above the lettering, it still mostly keeps it consistent, and it's looking rather pretty.
Tough thing to do. Making a pickup truck of this era look basically pretty or, just pleasing to the eye is a serious challenge.
Yeah, this design generally succeeded here. Yeah, I'd say that this design has generally succeeded in doing that, and in kind of straddling the line of being a very utilitarian vehicle, but also representing that in that era of pickup truck design, they were starting to think a lot more about styling and making them sort of more of a palatable vehicle for everyday use. And this design generally does a pretty good job of that.
One more great point, if I may, from this rear shot, the dummies. The dummies are a great addition. They add some life to it. But the way this one is positioned with the arm over the seat and then, their younger passenger in the middle seat there, having their arm behind them, that is iconic truck. That just happens because trucks are not a comfortable place to be. And especially if you have somebody in the middle, there's nowhere for your arm to go. This is the iconic truck scene right here.
I love trucks like this. It's brown, but little 1970s, 1980s mini trucks, that's a kind of vehicle that just doesn't exist anymore. And in a way, I'm kind of bizarrely nostalgic for them.
these have been becoming iconic vehicles lately. For a truck they were made to be used and then thrown away. These trucks have become something that a lot of people our age, I feel, are now looking for. They want to relive this era, and this one is such a great example of that, especially with the graphics.
I really like the box stopper too. I mean, that is just absolutely period 1970s, 1980s, and even into the early 90s. A lot of trucks had box stoppers like that. I can still see, in my mind, looking back on my youth, seeing so many trucks with features like that and dressed up like this.
And you're right, that topper is picture perfect. That is exactly the kind of topper that all of these trucks had, because these trucks were just being used for utility. Very rarely will you see them now, because nobody wants to use a truck like this for utility these days. But these toppers were everywhere. And then if you're in the right part of the United States, you would see them become a shed eventually.
I do have to agree, the topper is what I think is the most well-made part of the car. Just like a lot of thought went into that, with all the windows and even how they open. And it's great. And the indicators on top and everything. It's just such a good fit.
Yeah, it's expertly done for sure. The graphics down the sides are pretty cool. A little bit here and there is kind of questionable. I'm not so sure about having the Desperado on a bit of a jaunty angle there. It's a little bit hard to read, but it's definitely distinctive.
It's 50-50 for me, because yes, I agree from a design standpoint. As we look at it today, we look at this and go, isn't that a little tacky? Isn't that a little weird? But it's also very correct, because if you look at trucks of this era with graphics on them, they're very tacky and very weird and have no place on this. This is probably the slowest thing you could make in automation, and yet it has graphics on it as if it's an IMSA race car.
I do tend to remember that a lot of these trucks, if they did have graphics on them, they were just completely over the top, which is hilarious, because a lot of them had like 75 or 80 horsepower and could barely even get out of their own way.
To me, it was a little bit on the too much side for sure. I certainly enjoy myself the a little over-the-top 80s or late 70s kind of stickery doodads that are piled onto trucks or non-performance cars like this to make them appeal a little bit more, let's say, spicy. But then, like, is it just spice if you also have a hood scoop there? Isn't that a little... That's something that wouldn't really be that functional if it's just a tiny or a low-powered engine. Yeah, I think it was a little bit too much for me, that's for sure. And the tilted text there on the side, yeah, not a fan of it.
I would tend to agree. It lacks a little bit of cohesiveness there. The design is... Although it's good, it's certainly of the era. The rest of the design of the truck is brought to us so very utility that it feels like the performance package that this seems to be carrying doesn't quite match with that.
I feel like the graphics would maybe work in a bit of a different color on the truck. Like if this was red or white, I think it would look really quite good. But on the metallic brown, it's... Well, first of all, a metallic color on a truck like this would have been a kind of a luxury option. I mean, it was... Metallic paint was... Even, in the 70s and 80s, that was something you got on like a really special car. So this would be sort of like the top trim paint.
It feels like a few different ideas kind of merged together into one truck here. Maybe if they had gone fully in one way or the other, this could have worked. I think if they had really focused on that topper and applied that utility look to the rest of it, the bumper is very utility. The simple exhaust system is very utility. If that had continued through the whole thing, it might have actually been a little bit more impressive.
This one was an interesting one for me because it's obviously a coupe utility, or as most people know it, a ute, but it's also unmistakably based on a muscle car.
So I feel like I'm up first here to give the authority on this, since obviously this is a type of vehicle that I've spent an enormous amount of time around. And you're right, from the front, it looks like a muscle car of the late 70s, maybe mid 70s. And then as you swing around to the side, unmistakably either American or possibly Australian muscle car era ute, or as we would kind of call them here, car trucks or crux.
One thing I really get hung up on is that from the front it looks pure muscle. From the side, yeah, pure side, it looks very nice and flowy, simplistic almost, but elegant. Which again breaks with the bruteness of the front. And then when you turn it all around, you have a completely different car again. And that which is much more utility looking on the if you just have the rear view. So to me it really looks like 3 different cars that are merged into one, but not in a connected way.
I would say that you're right in that it looks that way, but I don't feel like it's wrong in that it's built that way. But we wish that they could do better than the actual OEM manufacturers did, because it did end up that way very often, where these designs look very disconnected. And you're right, from the back it looks very plain, almost soft even, and utility focused. And then from the front you would expect something that's going to be going down the quarter mile. It's pretty hard to wrap your head around the whole vehicle.
I think that's kind of the fundamental issue with a lot of the utes, especially as ConeDodger mentioned, as they were designed from the factories, that they started off with, the front end of just whatever car they were going to turn into a ute, and then they kind of had to blend it and turn it into a pickup truck from the rear, and it never really worked very well in reality. And this vehicle is very accurate in that regard, in that it's kind of blending these very disparate styling demands into something that would be, I would say it's a very believable vehicle, but it probably could have been done a bit better and a little bit more cohesively. I agree.
There's also some detailing as far as the inside of the bed goes that's maybe a little bit disappointing compared to the finishedness of the rest of the vehicle. The bed just looks like I said, a little unfinished and perhaps not even factory.
One thing that I immediately would point out when comparing the front to the side is how front heavy this car is in terms of design. It has a massive amount of weight put on the front, and then it feels feather light from the side. That's another thing. It's not just that the archetype of design looks different, front to side to rear, where it's going from muscle to elegant sports car to utility vehicle, but rather it's also in terms of just pure design strength, and strength in terms of weight, that the front is extremely heavy, and just that aspect of it as well doesn't quite mesh for me.
Something I just noticed, and we got to give kudos to the designer for, is that over top of the front fenders, there's some very clever and very sneaky 3D fixture use to give just a little bit more sort of body and height to the ridge from where the body transitions from the flat hood to the sides of the fenders. So that's actually really well done.
Absolutely, and it matches that arc over the rear as well. The back to the front looks like they were designed in the same way. They're not just trying to fill in the front with more fixtures. It really does match to the back design.
This car definitely has a lot going for it, and unfortunately all these excellent pieces just don't quite fit together for me there, but it is very well crafted.
You have a very early truck here that is, on the surface, very well crafted, but the more I look at it, the more I think it's kind of got some details that wouldn't really fit with the trucks of the era.
I'm trying to place just what era do you think we're going for here? Is it 40s into 50s?
40s into 50s French, I would say.
I would agree. Yeah, it does feel distinctly European and slightly airplane.
What's really throwing me off is just the sheer amount of chrome on this, because a lot of these early trucks, unless you spent a lot of money on your options book, a lot of this would have either just been body color or just painted white. There's very little chrome, because at the time chrome plating was actually quite expensive.
Maybe this is the vehicle that they would take to drive the week's produce to the farmer's market in style, and just be a little beyond the competition in terms of transportation.
It does feel that way. It almost feels as though they had taken a upmarket coupe of the era, and somebody had some fun with a acetylene torch and made this rear bed conversion for it in that way that it doesn't necessarily, because of the trimming, feel like it was a production vehicle.
Yeah, it does kind of have the feel of something that's not quite something you'd see in terms of a production car. But a lot of the details that are here are really fantastic. I really love these bed rails. They're so well done.
It is interesting. I don't want to make it sound like I don't think it's well crafted, because the use of fixtures here is phenomenal. This is a fantastic looking build, and in fact it actually flows together really well. It all looks very cohesive. It looks extremely intentional in its design, and I do really love that. And I especially love this red on black theme.
And the little steps in the side of the door, and what really what I noticed there, that is a nice detail which makes the car a lot better, even though you barely notice it, is the little lamps on the top. If you took those away, it would not frame itself nearly as well.
They do a really good job of framing the windshield, especially with the sunshade up top. Without those, it would feel incomplete.
I really love the way the moon visor comes forward just to give that roof a little bit more bulk, and as well as it conceals the windshield wipers. It's all fantastic design, but it does still feel very upmarket.
Or at very least, somebody spent a lot of time and a lot of money with, I imagine at the era, the J.C. Whitney catalog, and got every little aftermarket bit for their truck.
And then, of course, the asymmetric back that is quite fitting the era as well. And just beautiful. The little what is it called? The drag. Now, what is it called? The hook.
The hitch.
The hitch. Yes. There you have something to cut in the edit.
I find that the rear in this truck actually is kind of where it falls apart a little bit, because the front is obviously very well crafted and the sides are very nicely done, but the rear is... I like the asymmetric license plate placement, but I'm not really sure about the taillights on it, how they would have been done. Something like that, they probably would have been potted actually in a vehicle like this instead of integrated into the body. And I just feel like there's, certainly around where the bed is, I think it feels like there's something missing. Like there's I'd expect there at least to be like a fender roll or something, like a lip to give these great big flat panels of metals a little bit of body and stiffness to it. Another big ute.
Very different era this time.
I would say this is more sort of a peak Malaise era American ute, so sort of mid to late 1970s, early 1980s. Just it's got that sort of big over-the-top styling, you know, the long overhangs. Of course, it's got the fake wood paneling on the sides, which is just pure like mid-1970s kitsch.
How much weight could we possibly add to this already heavy and underpowered vehicle?
Exactly. I'd expect something like this to have a big 7 or even upwards towards an 8-liter V8 engine with like 160 horsepower.
That's a lot of power. I want to point out that this is a masterclass in design consistency. Like when you spin it around, it's like unmistakably but ugly and amazingly consistent, and I love it.
There's no bigger challenge for me when designing cars to make something that is completely era correct, and I'm sorry to say hideous in that way, because that's how they were. This is the design language of the era, and that's just how it is. And this executes that perfectly.
It's unapologetically ugly, but it works so well.
It doesn't have to put forth any excuses. It's just it. and it lives and breathes its Malaise era design choices. Just look at that. Woof, nice.
it makes me think that this is actually like a converted station wagon, basically.
Oh, for sure. However, as we swing around to the back here, I would say this one executes the bed pretty convincingly.
It does, and I love those taillights. I mean, that is just peak mid-1970s Americana with the sort of peak taillights and wrapping around the sides.
Also, it just adds a little bit of spice. Like the edges there just point to something that is a little bit more dangerous, a little bit more exciting in the car, even though, of course, it isn't. But let's put that aside. It just feels right.
Certainly the most exciting thing that's going to happen here, unless you filled the bed, with water and had a pool. There's really not a lot to do with these kind of vehicles that is exciting, which makes the design process so challenging, and they've done so well with it in that way.
Oh, that explains why you have the rails there. It's because you're probably going to slip, right? So, yeah, better hold on to your socks.
Gotta meet those safety regulations.
This is just a delightful little truck, like what you'd expect to see in the 60s and 70s in, say, Europe, or especially, or even parts of North America. They'd have little trucks like this. They weren't terribly common there, but in Europe especially, these were everywhere.
With how, apart from the, it could be steel up front there as well. It's probably steel, right? Steel bumper. But apart from maybe a little bit of detailing there, it does have an Eastern European touch to it as well. Especially when you look at the extremely Spartan interior. Yeah,
I would tend to agree, and it feels like a design. This car looks like it's 50 years old the day it was made, if you know what I mean. Like, no expense was made, not spared, in the design of this vehicle.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on what Rob just said there, actually, is that the choice of materials in this are really quite smart. Like, there is no chrome on this anywhere. It's all just paint and bare metal. And that's exactly how a very utilitarian truck of the era would have been.
Straight down to the wheels. Just the most basic steel wheel you could possibly throw at it.
And yet you have those really subtle flowing lines along the side. It's like beautiful design in its simplicity, but it's really working.
Yeah, there's some very subtle 3D fixture work going on to give just a little bit of depth to the side, with the body line running basically from the front fender all the way around to the other front fender by way of the rear, and just a little hint of another line essentially between the front and rear axles.
If creating something that is ugly but very impressive isn't the hardest thing to do, creating something that's subtle but interesting probably is the most difficult, and this is doing a fantastic job of that.
Also, the bed, how finely crafted is the cover for it. I mean, all the little hooks and straps that are going around, all neatly placed, and it feels so in place. And then, oh no, no, we are seeing the back. That is something that is like instantly off-putting to me. Like, where, how is that fitting to the rest of the car? Those taillights. Maybe you can illuminate maybe of how that is appropriate.
It would be appropriate if that itself was on a bumper. That exact panel placed on an exterior bumper from the vehicle, I think is perfect. But inset inside of the body, like you say, I don't quite think that matches the era.
Yeah, this feels very 80s to me, while the rest of the car feels kind of 70s, early 70s.
One more thing about the bed cover, if I may. The fact that it is not just a flat piece and bulges up is the kind of very fine-tuning craftsmanship that is just mind-blowing to me.
I'm going to be a little contrary and say that I actually kind of like the rear. It's just so unusual and so different. And it is a little reminiscent of sort of the very popular pickup trucks in Europe that were kind of van conversions in the 1960s and 70s. It's something you kind of see them doing.
This was a bit of an instant love story for me. This is just straight out of an 80s action movie. I was spinning this car around and trying to find anything I didn't like about it, and I had a really hard time. So I would ask you to please help me with it, because this just screams 80s off-road utility vehicle.
Yeah, this thing looks like it's built to have a good time. You know, with the front the winch mount and the front fog lights, and to the roll hoop in the bed, and definitely certain period appropriate graphics, but not really even tacky either. You know, this looks like it works very well together. Both, the only thing I can say is that maybe on the hood there'd be a little bit more sort of stamping, you know, sort of a ridge along the center, or symmetrical ridges sort of where the stripes on the hood go, just to give it a little bit more shape and character. But otherwise, I really can't find any fault with this design.
We have a show called Random Parked where we try to find car ads for each other, and one of the categories that we go through is a mistake I would make. And I'm going to go ahead and say that for the three of us in the room here, this is one of those mistakes you would make, where you would just have to buy it. You just need it. You don't have any reason to have it, but you need it. Because this is everything we loved about those late 80s vibes as far as graphics, the design, the fact that it looks like it's just so meant for off-road, even though it probably has no business off-road. It is the era that we all just kind of lust for now.
A detail that I've just noticed now is the builder has put some of those rings in the bed, just both on the bed hatch and also right up against the cabin. That just shows the attention to detail here, that they're thinking even, you know, they'd have reinforcements and stuff to keep these panels from rattling and drumming as the car drives along. So the builder really put a lot of thought into this.
As far as the graphics go, in contrast to what we saw earlier, this feels exactly right. This is the kind of graphics and detailing you would use, and a color that matches pretty well as to go with that kind of graphics look.
It is just feeling like overall super era appropriate. Also the big lettering on the rear, and the 4x4, and is all that good stuff from the 80s that we old fucks are kind of all about.
Especially the roll bar that is absolutely not a roll bar, but just there to house some, you know, fog lights for running the trails that you never run.
And those, of course, are very yellow, just to nicely contrast the rest of the vehicle and its chosen color.
Yeah, this is an absolutely fantastic build, and I do love, as Rob and ConeDodger pointed out, that this is very much a form over function kind of vehicle. It's kind of started becoming more and more popular with pickup trucks.
It was big in the 80s, and then it kind of faded away. Things got a little bit more utility or sports, and now this is kind of coming back, where it's almost the fake performance truck, and oddly enough, that's endearing.
I really like the treatment on the front bumper with the rubberized accordion section that you'd often see on these great big safety bumpers that became mandated in the 70s and 80s in the US, and manufacturers really struggled to integrate them with the cars and make them look right and function properly. And this is one of the things they did to just kind of try to hide some of the bulk of these huge bumpers that they needed to put on their vehicles.
We lamented them now, or we lamented them then, but now it makes this truck look right. If it didn't have those, this truck would almost seem a little out of place. All right, you guys can have the previous mistake. This is the mistake that I'll make. It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah, this feels like, you know, as you talked about in our Q&A session, your love of the 240Z, 280Z. This feels like that, but a Ute.
It does feel like that. It also feels a little bit Lotus inspired, with those very funky 70s and 80s Lotus designs, and it has no real reason to exist, and that makes it wonderful. Whether or not I can't really think of a pickup that existed quite like this in history, but it's making me wish that one did.
It sure is a little out there, and I would never have thought to say there is something out there that could be described as a sexy ute. But there you go.
Yeah, this definitely has all the elements to it. And it, as ConeDodger pointed out, it has a very Lotus feel, especially the Lotus Europa with its really weird rear end. This just feels like it's just as at home hauling a bale of hay on the back as it does ripping out a absolutely monster autocross time.
Dare I even say that perhaps the Europa would have aged a little better if it had a design like this instead of what they came up with.
It's a good point, actually, yeah. I like the graphic stripe down the side and the Spec 8 ST sticker. That's pretty cool.
One thing that I noticed probably a few minutes into looking at this car is that there are a few technical issues with the execution, that there are some parts that weren't quite cut out. And I think Chris can mention like what effort it takes to actually make a car like this, because it's rather challenging to make a car that isn't a ute into a ute.
Yeah, this started out as, I'm assuming it started out as a two-door, three-door hatchback body in sort of the 70s sports car style, and the builder of this spent an awful lot of time basically cutting the entire rear of the body away. It looks like basically everything from the doors back is custom made. So it's a huge undertaking, a very ambitious build, but there are a couple places where it's, as Rob mentioned, that there are some issues here and there, some missed spots with the body being cut away, and it does take away just a little bit from the overall effect, unfortunately. It's just a little bit sloppy.
As well with the treatment of the actual bed itself, the exposed fuel door and fuel lines and things like that. If some of that was perhaps a little bit more fleshed out, it would seem more like a factory build instead of a hacked apart vehicle. Not to discredit the amount of work that went into hacking this automation car to look like this.
One thing that I believe makes up for that, at least partially, is the side rear view. And I just love the interior in this one. There's quite a bit of effort going into that as well. And it's just, also from the plain rear view, it just seems so right. And then you see the name of the vehicle. It's just pure brilliance. The Speed Loader. I just love it so much. I love it.
With a Super Track automatic.
Super Track, yes. So the naming conventions are fantastic. The badging itself, I'm not completely in love with as far as the style that it's written in, but the actual naming and trim packages and everything are fantastic.
It's such a good fit there, and I agree, yes.
It is kind of a shame that we did say that we weren't really going to be marking cars on the interiors, because this car has an absolute 10 out of 10 interior, I agree.
One question I have is, how do you think about the connection between the front choice of headlights versus the rear taillights? To me, it looks good, but it feels something feels slightly off with that, as if the rear taillights are more something I would expect from a 40s, 50s vehicle, while the front is much more in line with a 60s, 70s vehicle.
I would say I agree, but it also feels thematically correctly part spin, as if they were grabbing for whatever parts they could possibly find to suit their design. I do wish that there was something for the rear treatment that would match the overall theme of the vehicle a little bit better in style and in era.
Very different from any of the other builds we've seen so far.
I was starting to get curious if we were going to go modern. This, I think, has to be the most intimidating era to build for this category, so I'm glad that we have at least one.
Agreed. Modern trucks, especially sort of the modern lifestyle truck as this is trying to be, where it's, you know, not necessarily a truly utilitarian vehicle, but it's got kind of the feel of a truck, and it makes the owner feel like they own a truck, but in reality it's basically just a converted SUV. But this does a very good job of that.
All around, it feels so well crafted, and like I said in the judging video, I just can't find anything wrong with it, and at the same time, it is so modern, generic. It is. It's just, after seeing all the others, like the history of the pickup truck, this is what we ended up with. I'm a little confused, I have to say. It is very well crafted though, and very nicely designed. It's consistent. It has presence. It has all the details in place, with the roof rails and like the little bumpiness on the sides, the front and the rear, and just overall really nicely built. But I can't get myself to enjoy it. Maybe it's because it's all made out of clay. I don't know.
The color choice is definitely interesting, but again, not wrong. It's not wrong in that it's a color that we wouldn't see on a truck of this era. I just really, I do struggle to call it a truck, but we have to accept the fact that this is where trucks have gone. And it's so perfectly over-designed for what it is, much like these kinds of vehicles are now. And it works so well in that way. This is absolutely believable for a modern, family truck. If this was in a brochure, I'd be like, yep, that's probably any number of modern manufacturer to create this.
Yeah, and as I'd mentioned in the judging video, this is the kind of truck that if a real world manufacturer would build it, they would sell every one of them that they built and then some. They couldn't build these things fast enough, and the public would just snap them up like crazy. Compared to the front, the rear there's a little bit of inconsistency, sort of front to side to rear in this, and it's a little bit off-putting overall.
Yeah, I would say this does suffer a little bit from the old Ute problem, where it just doesn't quite flow together right, where trying to make the opening for the bed has disrupted the proportions of the vehicle enough that it makes your eyes kind of go, this isn't quite right. It does raise a question of how much bed does there need to be for a truck to be a truck? Because this has to be darn near the minimum.
Yeah, I think you'd struggle to even get a child's bicycle in the back of this thing.
Some of the nice details I want to point out here. Right behind the front wheel arch on the side, you have this triangular shaped feature, which really accentuates the flow of the whole side. And again, very subtle moldings on the side, which add to the flow of the vehicle. And then what I really like is also the top center brake light, which of course is kind of standard, but it nicely frames. And then the equivalent shape right in the center top of the rear. And I think that really works well together.
It's nice cohesive design. It makes it look like it was thought out. It was designed to match together. Somebody took the time to have elements match each other throughout the design. And the little notches in the, I don't know what you would call it, the body cladding that goes around the bottom and fenders, it all matches so nicely to all the other designs throughout the vehicle.
I do have two questions for you though. And the first one is, do you think that the top rails on the roof rails, have a little bit of too chubby mountings?
I would agree to that, especially with the large center mount. I think if it was just if it was just the outer and the inner, sure. But having that one in the center, you're never going to put anything that heavy on that roof.
The other thing, too, to point out about the roof rails is that I think they would have looked better if the rail itself was sort of like a chrome or a steel color instead of black, because it kind of gets hidden a little bit. Having certainly like a steel or aluminum, or even, I don't think chrome necessarily would have been appropriate, but having just a contrasting color up there would really tidy the design up quite a bit.
or even body color, just in the rails, not in the mounts, just in the rails, just to tie it into the rest of the design a bit more and make it pop.
Agreed.
My second question is, how do you like the bumpy design of the lower rail around the car?
Personally, as a design choice, I hate it. But as appreciating the build's reality and that this is the modern design language, I like the fact that they included it because it is so era correct.
Yeah, this is exactly what you'd expect to see from a lifestyle truck. That is, especially the trucks that are starting to come out from some of the bigger manufacturers that would absolutely have something like this to lend it sort of an appearance of toughness. And, you know, I always like to make a comparison that it seems like they take inspiration from a lot of these sort of industrial grade cell phone cases with the really heavy duty plastic cladding and stuff, just to give it this feel of being really tough and indestructible.
Have you shopped for an electric drill lately or a power tool? It's the same design language.
That's unfortunately so true. One final little detail that I want to point out, and that's in connection with what I pointed out before, the little triangle for the front wheel arch is also in the back window on the side, but mirrored. So that's a really nice addition. I think there is so much care going into the design of this car, and it still looks so damn generic. It's brilliant, and it's very boring at the same time, and it's really good.
Okay, I guess that's a wrap then.
Well, by golly, we've done it.
And that concludes this category. A big thanks to our guest for joining us, and thank you for watching. Check out the links below and subscribe to the channel to not miss any of the competition videos.